Awesome. Well, welcome to those of you for whom, if this is your first time on the call, would you go ahead and just either do the hand raise and the camera? Ray, welcome. Where are you calling in from?
Hi, Todd. Thanks for having me. Coming in from Gilbert, Arizona, the East Valley of Phoenix.
Awesome. Welcome, Ray. Great to have you here. Bruce, tell everyone who you are, where you come from.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, this is first call I'm joining here. I'm glad to be here. I'm in Salem, Massachusetts right now, so I'm one of the Massachusetts state leaders out here.
It's awesome. And you guys just got together for beers like 2 nights ago, right? In real life.
We did. Yeah, it was great. Great conversations and some great plans to get engaged.
Awesome. Love it. That's great. Jeff.
Hey, I'm Jeff Bergenthal. I'm calling in from Durham, North Carolina. Had met Eric at the American Democracy Summit in LA in September and got connected into this.
Awesome. Great to have you here, Jeff. Welcome. Matthew.
Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon. Currently in Las Vegas, but I live in Washington, D.C. and joined a team over there. And so happy to help out. And I was at the MIC. It was a good time to see you talk and everything else at the MIC. It was a long weekend.
Yeah, it was a long week. I'm sick. But Matthew, great to spend time with you there. And thanks for being on the call now. Okay, good. And for everyone else, like we always say this, but I just think it bears repeating, whether this is your first call or you've been hanging on with us for 2 years, you are fully welcome. You're part of the team, whether you are doing things outside of these calls or whether this is like literally the only point of engagement you have with us, like it's all okay. Because just putting your name on this effort and on associating it with Veterans for All Voters, like that in and of itself has a huge impact. So and anyone feeling like guilty or like because you missed the last 2 calls, it would be awkward to come back and join the next call. Never feel that. You're always welcome. We try to keep expectations low, and you do what you can from the place that you're at. So that's really our ethos. Derek, I know you well, but have folks met you? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Todd. Great seeing you last week. Derek Blumke, co-founder of Student Veterans of America, worked in mental health for VA for a while, tech startups for 5 years back here in Michigan, trying to do what you all are trying to do, which is save our country from eating itself.
Well said. Save our country from eating itself. What better use of our time can I imagine than trying to do that through the things that we're doing? So let me we got 2 agenda items for today, which is sort of ambitious for us. One is I'm excited to see Zak Tomich on the call, who is with the Good Party. And some of you may have heard of the Good Party. How many of you have heard of the Good Party and kind of what they're doing? Okay, so this would be a great chance for Zak to kind of share, like, direct from him. This is what we are. This is what we are. This is what we are not. This is what we're trying to do. And here's how we're doing it. He's going to preview a couple of technology tools that they're bringing to market in support of candidates. So there's a huge, as we know, technology incumbent advantage. Whether it's Act Blue or NGP or these database systems that really, it's like the more information you have, the more powerful you are, kind of a thing. And both political parties have amassed that power through their technology platform. So the Good Party is kind of trying to take an interventionist approach on that, which I think is really interesting. So we hear from Zak, and then also I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to put this in the chat. We are publishing today our messaging guide, and you can access it by going to veteransforallvoters.org/messaging. So this is the newly published as of today Veterans for All Voters messaging guide. And we're going to have Ben Patinkin, who is a pollster and messaging expert. Oh, Ben's on the call. So we got Ben with us. Ben is going to talk in the second half of the call about the messaging. They've done a bunch of polling on how do you talk about election reform, and there's some real like do's and don'ts within that. So I think not, it's not all intuitive for me. Like here's one of the headlines is like, you don't actually try to explain Final Five voting. You don't even talk about how it works. You just get to why, like the reason, like this is why it matters, not so much. So there's things in there that I was even surprised. Did I get the URL wrong? Sorry, we'll get it right if I missed it. So Ben's going to walk us through that. Or I'm going to walk you through our messaging guide, and then Ben's going to amplify based on the research that he did, which is what is our messaging is driven on the research he did. So, so without further ado, though, thank you, Ben and Jacques, for being on the call. And Jacques, I'm going to kick it over to you, and I'll just kind of earmark us for about 20 minutes if that works for you.
Yeah, that's great. I will do my best to go quickly. Thank you all for having me. My colleague Jared Alper is here as well. Jared, wave, or yep, there we go. Great. Jared's our political director at Good Party. And yeah, I mean, really, two quick things. Happy Veterans Day to everyone on the call belatedly. And then also congrats on the new name. I'm looking forward to seeing the messaging stuff because it's interesting, the decision to move to Veterans for All Voters. I like it. It's inclusive of all voters, which is key. The other part of the old name that's interesting to me and kind of where we connected initially, Eric and I in the early days, Veterans for Political Innovation, it's just this idea that our system is due for an upgrade. And so my name is Jacques. I'm the CEO of Good Party. Good Party, we're building technology to help bring more competition to the system and make it possible for people that want to run and serve their community unaffiliated from the Republican and Democratic parties to do so. We think that's a pretty good idea that's been out there for a long time that just hasn't been able to take off. And we think tech can have a role in that. So to do that, I'm going to go through a handful of slides. I'm going to go quickly. I know you guys know the problem. I think it's just important for you guys to hear who we are, why we're working on it the way we're working on it, why we're tackling the candidate side of the equation. We're grateful for the work that you all are doing and other organizations in the reform movement are doing, if that's even what we're calling it anymore. Can't wait to hear the messaging. But the reform movement around the rules, because not only the rules sort of disincentivizing competition, but well, we'll get to the story here. I'll just get right into it. So let me just share my screen here. Just please let me know if you guys can see my shared screen. Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm going to go quickly. I'm not going to cover everything about Good Party. I'm going to focus in on the tools we're building, the tech side of it. Ultimately, sort of where are we starting from? Well, there's endless unsolved issues for societies to navigate. You guys all know this. Politicians run for office at this point, decade after decade after decade, promising they're going to solve the same things, whether that's climate, whether that's civil rights, whether that's civil discourse, whether that's veterans issues, right? And supporting our vets, robotics, AI, I mean, you name it, these things go unsolved. And yet the promises keep getting made cycle after cycle. And our take is that it's both parties, right? It's both major parties. They have been corrupted, frankly, and the numbers are there to suggest that it's a money problem, right? You guys are probably familiar with these kinds of things, but 99% of all incumbents in Congress raise a majority of their funds from what we'll call big money donors. At any given time, less than 20% of the voting public, the people they serve approve of the job they do, and yet 90% of them get reelected based on money. So we've got a problem there, and we think both of them have it. The data says that they both have the same problem. They're two sides of a coin in this respect, and it's just growing, right? So the last presidential election cycle went off like just berserk. It went up to $15 billion. The midterm was the most expensive race. It was more expensive than any presidential before 2020. And so you can only imagine what's coming in 2024 in terms of how much money is going to be spent on Republicans and Democrats telling us that Trump or Biden are not as bad as they seem. And then there's that little sliver of green in there. And what's that? That's for third parties. Well, arguably there's no return on that investment. And that's why no money goes there, right? They can't win and they're not winning. And therefore the donors, the big money, special interest donors are not putting money on those horses. Our take is that there's more money, more problems, no matter who you ask, except for, I guess, this makes some sense. Democrats at this current state don't want to totally throw in the towel and say that we're on the wrong track because they've got the presidency. But for the most part, people understand that we're not on the right track. Problems keep emerging. And so Good Party's mission is to make people matter more than money in our democracy. We've got to put people back at the center. Our take is that if the system of rulemaking and the system of problem solving is strictly incentivized by capital, frankly, and people are not at the center, it's not going to serve people, and we're headed on the track that we're on. But given the time and place we are in technology and history and all these things, there's also opportunity for abundance, really, if we could just get the incentives aligned and the rules focused on the right things. And so what do the people want? Starting with, if we want to make people matter more than money, many of you, I imagine, fit into this category of identifying as independent, not Republican, not Democrat necessarily. That number is going down over time. You can see less and less people want to identify as red or blue. And just kind of taking a gut snapshot, this is, make of it what you will from the source. This is, no labels and Harris. They're obviously focused on the presidential cycle. That's where the majority of folks do focus when they think about politics, right? They think about the presidency. But even so, 59% of all voters say they would consider a moderate independent candidate for presidency, 70% of independents, but majority of both people identifying as red or blue would be interested in something other than what their existing party is serving them. And so what's the myth, the establishment myth that we're out there trying to bust, the Good Party is focused on? It's this idea that an independent or a third party candidate is a spoiler or a wasted vote. Now, if you ask me, the system itself is spoiled rotten as it is. Now, I have a strong opinion about it. I don't think that the people that are in office are serving us. I don't think that they've been serving us for a long time. So I don't think you can spoil something that's already rotten. I do think I understand the duty of voting and engaging in elections. But at some point you hit a point of absurdity where it's this idea that a wasted vote is something other than a Republican or a Democrat. And yet when you vote for a Republican or a Democrat, you get the same results over and over again. So I think we kind of ask the question is, what is an actual wasted vote? Where are you actually wasting your vote? And might it be that you're wasting your vote on these same people over and over again, especially when they serve up Trump and Biden again after 2020's debacle? So the establishment version of a viable candidate are these folks, right? I mean, this is literally who they have offered us. I'm not going to speak to the president's mental health issues, but you can draw your own conclusions. This is literally a mugshot. Pelosi's been there for a long time. She was a Speaker of the House multiple times over, still hanging around. Mitch McConnell's got his own health issues. I don't mean to be disrespectful. This was a slide created before this person passed away. This gentleman here is already pushing 90, and they will tell you with a straight face that these are viable candidates in our democracy. These are the best people to lead our country. That's the answer that the establishment gives us. And so we don't accept that. We ask ourselves, what can we do? And no, this isn't a crowbar to go protest at the Capitol with. This is a lever. Our take is that to take on $20 billion in money that's going to tell you to vote for this guy or that guy, we need a lever. That lever, from our perspective, is technology. Technology has creatively disrupted, fundamentally changed, let's put it that way, every aspect of our lives. How we entertain ourselves, how we shop, how we gather information, how we socialize. You name it, your life has been changed by this little thing. And so we think, we ask ourselves, why not for democracy? Why has that not come to the way we engage with our elections? Why has that not come to the way that we look at our choices? Why has that not come to the way that we run our campaigns? And the important thing for us, and this is kind of where we get most excited, is that the demographic shifts are making real change possible now. What do we mean by that? Well, there's over 300 million mobile app users in this country. That's almost everybody. If you've seen kids at a restaurant under the age of 10, this is even little kids are sitting there on mobile apps. So 135 million eligible non-voters. I jumped the lead there, but the trends are in our favor. So in 2020, 74 million voted red, 81 million voted blue. And the biggest number out there is the 83 million people in this country that didn't choose either. And that's your democracy for you. And so of the ones that do vote, I think estimates that about 52 million are voting lesser of two evils. So they're not even voting for something or someone, they're just voting against it. And the non-voters got it there, 83. That gets you 135 million people in our democracy that do not feel like they're voting for something, that are not happy with the choices, or not motivated by the choices they're offered. So our excitement is that digital natives are rising. Whether that's good or bad is to be determined, but it's a population of young people that have a lot at stake in terms of the future. And they're in this election cycle, they'll be the majority. And the boomers and older, time's having its way with them, and they're decreasing. And so the majority of the digital natives identify as independent, and less than 50% of them are participating. So we know this old rule of thumb is, older folks do turn out and vote, younger folks don't. And I would argue that has something to do with what the elected class looks like. And so what are we doing about it? Our hypothesis is that digital natives care, they just need better choices to vote and more modern tools to participate and run. And what do we mean by digital natives? I should have said that. I mean, so Pew defines that as, I think, born after 1982. It's not to say that that's the only people that we're building for. I mean, I'm not in that bucket. Some of our team isn't in that bucket. But at the same time, if you want to build a movement for change and get people excited about something in the future, as opposed to sort of a doom and gloom, you start there, the early adopters. And this is the biggest, perhaps the biggest sort of untold story that's sitting out there from our perspective about where to focus. So I did it myself. I started talking at the beginning, 59% of people would vote for a moderate independent. We talk about 6 people, Trump, Biden, Pelosi, McConnell. We talk about, the flavor of the month might be DeSantis or AOC or whoever's making noise. And yet 500,000 elected local offices in this country. This number was astounding to me. Now, whether there should be 500,000 elected offices in this country, that's a whole nother debate. But the reality is there's over 500,000 elected offices, and 70% of them go uncontested. And what does that mean? That means about 350,000 opportunities to serve your community aren't even being contested. We might not even know about many of them, but at minimum, they're just kind of defaulting to red or blue. So that strikes us as an opportunity. And so we started building. What are we building? We're building free technology to empower independents to run viable campaigns, win elections, and ultimately serve their communities. At Good Party, our focus is public service, not political celebrity. We're not looking for people to go become famous. We're looking for them to serve their actual community. That's why we're excited to talk to you all, because we think that there's nobody out there that better understands the notion of service, that's not sort of corrupted or biased by politics. And so what are we building? And this is the core of the discussion today. I won't get into all the other things about how we're mobilizing the young folks. I really want to just talk about what we're building. And Jared has been a big part of this too. We think, oops, I think I jumped over a slide. Candidates need 3 things to be viable. Now, most lists of 3 things the candidates need focus on money. I buried money a little bit here because our objective is to make people matter more than money in our democracy. And we don't think that candidates, I should say campaigns and political elections should be a transaction, a financial transaction. We're not trying to drive the cost of elections up. We're trying to use technology to drive the cost of elections down. The main thing that we think anybody that's thinking about running for office needs is a playbook. They need information and they need support. And candidly, if you're trying to run as an independent, unaffiliated with red or blue, there's not a lot of support out there for you. And you're left to your own devices to find the information you need. So what we said is, boy, what if we go ahead and start building tools to help people, A, get informed. So kind of explore and decide if running for public office, local office, state office, whatever it is right for them. And if they make that decision, if they make that decision that they're at a stage in their life where they think that service can be part of their portfolio of things they're doing, give them an AI campaign manager. Just give them the knowledge and the information that's kind of behind lock and key and behind big consulting firms and things of that nature, and just put it out there in the public domain as a tool that anybody can access. And so that's what we started building. And ultimately, if we get people elected using our tools, on the other side of it, when they start to serve in office, we want them to also use the tools to stay transparent, to stay accountable, to stay plugged into their community. The other piece that candidate needs is they need volunteer community. I call volunteerism 2 things, time and money. So they need people to help spread the word. And then they need people to make some contributions if they can financially. Ultimately, over time, our objective is to drive that down to 0. We don't want people to have to go raise a bunch of money, raise millions of dollars to serve their community. The 2 things shouldn't be paired the way they are today. And then at the end of the day, you need votes to win an election. In fact, that's all you should need to win an election is votes. So what are we building? AI campaign manager. And I'm being mindful of my time here. I'm going to try and wrap this up quickly. There is a link to a demo. I'll share this with everybody afterwards so that you can click the demo, just go through it yourself. At your own pace. It has a little tooltip thing that explains things throughout. But essentially, I described there's the upfront phase, that explore phase, where you click on our site, you go through a little bit, give a little bit of information. And because of this wave of generative AI tools, We feel lucky that that's happening at this time. We're building on top of that. And what does that mean? We think we can save people a lot of time. So you give a little bit of information about yourself, and very quickly we can give you a snapshot of what it takes to win. You got to have a statement of why you're running. You got to have a little bit of information about the jurisdiction that you're thinking about running in. Up front, we're trying to give you information about what's even available. What could you run for? What are the offices in your area that you could serve in? And then once you make some selections, the idea is to generate a snapshot of, we call it a path to victory. Like, how many votes do I need? Do I need 100 votes, 1,000 votes, 10,000 votes? Like, what's the size of this objective that I'm running? And so, assuming you make the decision to run, then we've started to build. This is very early days, so be patient with us as we kind of improve this over time. We think this will be dramatically different over the next couple of years. But in the first instantiation, it's essentially a campaign fitness tracker. We got people tracking their 10,000 steps and tracking their protein and their carbohydrates. They're tracking all kinds of things about their personal health. Your campaign is the same way. It's a series of micro actions that, if you're taking regularly, over time they compound, and at the end of your election, you have a chance to win the campaign. And so what we're trying to do is quickly distill down to a person, what is the roadmap, essentially? What is that, whether it's over 12 weeks, whether it's over 6 months, whether it's over 3 weeks, just depending on what it is, how much work is required, and then can they keep track of that, and are they on track, or are they off track? And then the last piece that's kind of exciting and interesting, and again, these are just screen grabs of the back end. We'll call it the My Content Creator. These are generative AI tools. And I don't know if you guys have played with OpenAI or any of this stuff, ChatGPT. But what we're doing is we're taking the niche that is political campaigns, political strategy, basically downloading Jared's brain, my experience. And I didn't spend a lot of time introducing myself, but I did spend a decade on the inside of the political machine. I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked for a governor. And I left it knowing that we needed something else than the system that we've got. And what we've started to do is just download that into a campaign content generator that helps people get off of zero, right? The blank page is pretty intimidating. How do I create social content to make people aware of my campaign? How do I generate press releases? How do I generate campaign scripts? And in the traditional approach, you got to hire people, you got to add people to your campaign over time. We're not saying that that's all gone at this stage, but the idea of empowering the individual to do as much of that as they can themselves with these tools is more real than it's ever been. And I think once you have a chance to click through the demo, you'll see that more clearly. And then the gist of it is, we have a user agreement. This, once upon a time, you would call this pledge. But what's the idea? You're independent, people-powered, anti-corruption. Independent means that you're independent of the two major parties and their fundraising machine. If you want to run as a Republican and a Democrat, there's plenty of ways to do that. That's not what our tools are for. And so you're running as an unaffiliated candidate, an independent, or we're open to third parties as well, because they don't have a shot in hell these days under the current system. So we're supporting folks like the Forward Party candidates and others, Green, Libertarian, you name it. People powered means that if you're going to raise money, which at this stage in the game and the stage of where we're at, you kind of, that's still part of the system. You're doing it from individuals, not special interest groups, not the kind of the corporate PACs or the union PACs and things of that nature. Just it's coming from an individual. It's a proxy for a vote almost. And then anti-corruption, and this is broader than just what's there. Remain transparent to constituents, but you see promote competition and choice in elections. We want people that are of the mind that the system as is not fair, is not broken, or is not designed correctly, is not designed to have choice for voters, is not designed to have competition. And so once you're in office, you're going to conduct yourself in a way that doesn't then turn around and say, how do I bar entry to others? You're actually trying to open it up, and you're comfortable with the idea of competition. And then we have a minimum standard of civility. We have to protect the platform to some degree. If we got a neo-Nazi that is looking for a platform and looking for a way to promote themselves, it's just not going to be through Good Party. They can find other platforms to do it, and so we have to have some ability to regulate. But the idea is that we want it to be a marketplace of ideas, genuinely, and people coming with different points of view. So that's the what happened there? I jumped myself out of it. So that's the gist of it. We have something we've launched alongside the tools called Good Party Academy. Jared leads that. It's essentially like a master class for folks to sign up and be able to join a community of folks that are using the tools and are considering running for office and are getting kind of like a more stepwise walkthrough of the tools. That both serves them for people that don't want to do things in a totally automated way. And it also serves us in the sense that we have user groups that are helping us improve the tools rapidly. I mean, that's everything for us, is how quickly can you get user feedback and make tweaks and touches and add features that make people more comfortable with the tools and that are more useful. And so all of that said, we've been at this for a while now, but this year things started to really move for us. In August in Nashville, we had an individual, Terry Bowe. She was elected to the Nashville City Council. She was a Good Party Academy. She was a Good Party certified candidate. And what's that mean? Well, she went through and took the pledge. She says independent, people-powered, anti-corruption. She was able to use our tools to help her amplify her campaign. And then here, just last week in November, we're super excited to celebrate 10 other candidates across the country, and a very small targeted sample that we went after of folks that were running for office as independents or third-party candidates, also took the pledge, started to use the tools. And what we're doing right now, we're in the retro phase, right? We're looking at what did they use, how much did they use it, what's the valuable stuff, what's the not so valuable stuff, and then how do we flip that into better tools for 2024. And so with 2024 coming, what we want to do is talk to our friends at Veterans for All Voters, and then talk to our friends at other organizations that are in this reform space. Our theory is you all are super competent and committed to the mission. We're mission aligned in the big picture. We think there should be more choice, more competition in the system. And I can't help, I've told Eric this, I told Todd this, I can't help but think that while they need you and want you to contribute to the mission of Veterans for All Voters, just like with you all and the other groups that are in the reform movement, I feel like the individuals that make up these organizations and they make up the volunteer movement of these organizations are just as qualified, if not more so, than the average person to actually just run and serve themselves as well. So while we want you to continue to work on the rules so that we get more competition in the system and more choice, at Good Party, we're saying, go ahead and do it yourself. Just be the change, right? Pick a local office and just get involved, use the tools, see if they can help you, and run and change the rules from the inside, because we think it's more possible than it's ever been before.
Jacques, that was great. Thanks so much. And I do want to encourage folks. Jacques put his email in the chat. Maybe Eric, you can share that as well. Do definitely encourage folks to follow up with Jared or Jacques. If you're thinking of running, or if you have candidates that are running, I think the premise of we're going to look at leapfrogging a very static industry through technology, AI, and other things, like we can just kind of jump to the next generation, because the two-party duopoly, like the size and scale and the technology and the data that they have is sort of like an incumbent advantage, but their inability to innovate on that is also an incumbent disadvantage. And so how do we, leverage new tools and equip people to run? I also, acknowledge the comment in the chat about, ballot access, Scott, being a huge issue. So we know there's a lot here, but do follow up with Jacques. Jacques, you and Jared are welcome to stay on the call. This was, like I said, sort of an ambitious thing to do, have two conversations at once, but thanks for what you're doing. And look, we talk all the time, but encourage folks to build a relationship with you as well.
Yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out directly to me or Jared. We love talking to everybody that's aligned, and just thank you so much for giving us a little bit of time to share what we're up to. We're excited to hear more about your work too.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. So let's do this. We've got Ben on the call. Let me try to share my screen. I gotta get my slides together. Hold on a second. We got them right here. So I will share screen, but we're gonna talk about messaging. So I just shared in the chat, and maybe Eric, you can do it again, but just the messaging guide that VAV published today. This is internal. So this is not stuff that we're going to have live publicly. We'll call it internal for now, but definitely want you to have it and know that it's a resource for you. So let me share my screen, and then I'm going to invite Ben to kind of join me in amplifying some of the messaging, because it's really, we were smart enough to know that there's a right way and a wrong way to do this, and we're not necessarily the experts, but there are smart people who are experts. Ben is one of the most biggest experts in the country as it relates to this work, and so we've borrowed heavily and cited his research in our new messaging guide. This was based on what he shared at the American Democracy Summit, both his research company, as well as Citizen Data, who does a lot of polling and messaging work in the reform movement as well. So, and then this guide you've got, it's 12 slides. This is a little bit of like, you don't need to memorize it. What it really is hopefully there's a couple tools in here for you to walk in and actually build your own personal script for why you're doing this work. But let me jump into the substance. You guys see my screen? Thumbs up. Good. So why is messaging important? This is sort of obvious, but we are more powerful as an organization if we speak with one voice. Our brand values are also super important. We talk about, like, we want to talk above the political fray. Like, I, as a discipline, never talk about elected officials in the context of our work because it immediately creates a flashpoint and a mental model for people that is unhelpful. So there's things that Eric and I try to do as disciplines, which is to truly be nonpartisan, and operate above the political fray, which is a value of ours, and to bring more people into this work. Discipline around messaging is really important, because if we all have our own interpretation about why we're doing this, then you have 285 people out there speaking on, different sheets of music, and that's, not what we want. So our ask is to sort of inform this and be disciplined, at least in the context of you being a Veterans for All Voters volunteer, that, this is how we kind of want to talk about this stuff. Also, there are like sophisticated answers and money that has been spent on polling that actually informs what best practices. One of the biggest aha moments for me, Eric and I almost laugh about it. There's been so many conversations about how to explain Final Five voting, and then the polling comes back and it's like, you don't explain it. That's actually like a fool's errand. You talk about the why values that undergird it. So that's a big part of this.
Is it okay if I just play color commentary really quickly?
Yeah, Ben, please come on in.
Thank you all for having me here. I just add and emphasize that point, like that bullet number 4 that you see on the screen is probably the most important. Like when you're thinking about how to message election reform, when you get stuck on the how, you get bogged down in details, and it allows folks to kill it with questions. Is one of the ways that we like to talk about things in focus groups. You talk about the why, you add in like aspirational values, you explain what the positive outcome is here, because most people haven't even thought about election reform, probably ever. And so you want to give them the positive why instead of getting to the minutia.
This is great. I'm going to advance slides and then defer to you, Ben, to kind of amplify. Yeah. The thing that is always indisputable is your own experience. So when I went to vote, I only had one person on the ballot, and that doesn't feel right to me. When I went to go vote, I realized it was a closed primary and I actually couldn't vote, and that was wrong to me. So your own values, your own personal experience, and the voter experience is always a powerful, affirming thing. I think part of what I would say is, and the reason that this isn't intuitive for us, is a lot of us are on this call, including myself, because I'm excited by the possibility that election reform can have to stabilize the American political system. But so that's my animating value, but that isn't actually as much what convinces people on the power of Final Five voting. That's a little too heady for most people. So there's I think a discipline here of like paring back towards simpler messages. These are key stats. We don't need to go through these, but I think part of what I try to have as a discipline is like a couple stats that I just pound every single time I talk about this work. 57% of people being dissatisfied with democracy. 76% thinking that Americans or candidates should have to earn the majority of the vote, which you don't in a plurality election. 91% of Americans believing that all voters should be able to vote in any candidate in every taxpayer-funded election. So just, I think, grabbing for yourself a couple stats that you think are powerful. 59% of military veterans below the age of 49 are not identified as either Republican or Democrat. That's really interesting. And then there is this, I know this isn't your work, Ben, this was Citizen Data, but I thought this is kind of interesting. There's these kind of 3 buckets if you think about where people are at. There's these democracy defenders, that's where we all fall. We're people that like kind of understand it. We're trying to work towards preserving it. And we want to reduce division. There's these democracy shifters. And this is probably most of where our persuasion work needs to happen. These are people that are open to reform messages, but need to be explained how it can work. And then democracy inhibitors are like literally the people trying to tear us down. Irregardless of what the motivations are, they're angry, they're just distrustful, they're skeptical of us and others. I think part of what I took from this was like kind of spend your time on the democracy shifters.
And-
Yeah.
Oh, and I'd add, just like look at the numbers there for democracy shifters. Like that speaks to how little people think about this. There's 122 million Americans who fit into that, and that's like 60% of that data set. So a lot of folks who just aren't paying attention, and as a result, are open to persuasion on the subject matter.
So let's get into persuasion, and this is where, Ben, I'm gonna defer to you. Talk to us about sort of this notion of good guys and bad guys.
So when you're dealing, so a lot of these conversations are ballot issue in particular, but also just for legislative issue advocacy work. You can it's easier for folks to make decisions on where they fall based on where trusted sort of spokespersons lie in terms of the spectrum on support and opposition. So having bad guys, the proverbial bad guy, and having the proverbial good guy in a fight defined helps us make our case. And so, bad guys in a lot of the polling that we see, and these all sound similar, but to the point that Todd was making earlier, there's a lot of nuance from state to state in terms of like what specific phrase works best as sort of like the proverbial boogeyman that we're trying to take power away from. And that's actually, I digress a little bit here, but that's the key concept for election reform. This is a conversation about power. Who has it, who does not, and how we want to reorient it. So we are trying to take power away from the bad guys and give it to the good guys. In the case of the bad guys, it is politicians, party bosses and elites, special interests, lobbyists, extremists, insiders. You've seen those used in some derogatory manner in some place, I'm sure, before, and you see it here. These are the folks that pop. Who are we trying to give power to? Who are the good guys? Well, they're veterans, they're you all, they're seniors, they're small business owners. In many cases, depending on the reform, we're talking about just registered independents in Alaska in 2020. One of our the people that we used in our advertising was a gentleman who is, I think, out in the Mat-Su, outside of Anchorage, who's just an older gentleman, looked quintessentially Anchorage, and was registered as a undeclared voter. And he was just a great spokesperson. So that's a dynamic. Who are the bad guys? Who have the power, and who we're trying to give the power to?
That's great. And I think there's something unintuitive about this, because like even part of our rebrand, the way that Eric and I think used to talk about this was political innovation. Like there's exciting new ideas, but selling exciting new ideas on a system that people like loathe is actually much harder than just anchoring this as like we're fighting for the good guys versus the bad guys. And in some ways that's not intuitive to me or how I would normally think about going about it, but that's part of what drove our rebrand away from the word political innovation, because it's like talking about getting a paint job on a car that you already think is like completely broken down. And it's like, well, why would I want to talk about innovating on,
well, that's actually a really good point and something to be aware of. There's layers to that onion. If you go back a few slides and you look at like, the percentage of Americans who are dissatisfied with various pieces of our democracy right now, those numbers are real and they're valid. But if you ask voters in a poll, are you satisfied or are you proud of your election system? Most people will say they're fine. They think it's fine. They think it's working well and it's something to be proud of. So that gets to the importance of trying to make sure that we're it's not that we're innovating here. We need to identify shared values and shared concerns. And the shared concern to what you were mentioning a moment ago, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that the broad system, sorry, my phone's going off here. The broad system is broken. This two-party system, people aren't listening, the politicians aren't listening, the bosses aren't listening, it's being run by extremists. that's the problem. It's not necessarily the elections that are the problem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, really, really good insight and nuance on that. So we're fighting against not elections per se, but we're fighting against these things: politicians, party bosses, extremists.
Exactly.
And we talk a lot of, I mean, extremists for me always feel safe. And extreme political behavior, performative political behavior. And okay, yeah, this is good. All right, talk to us about this slide, Ben.
All right, so so this is identifying the why, and in each state, you know, it can be, it's different from state to state, but there are some general themes that you can expect. So number one, in South Dakota, when you're talking about open primary, you know, opening up a closed primary system, you know, just identifying the unfairness. It's wrong that 148,000 independent voters are currently shut out of taxpayer-funded primary elections. That tests, you know, through the roof in South Dakota as a reason to support open primary reform. In Missouri, there's another way to talk about the why behind our proposals. It's empathizing with frustrations, like I was talking about a moment ago. The power, you know, the bad guys, they have too much power. So the same politicians win year after year because all the power's in their hands. This reform takes that power away. It gives it to regular voters so that they have more voice and more choice in terms of the election process. And then in Wyoming, a similar sort of dynamic where we point to a common complaint. It's not about the election system, it's about what we're being offered here, right? It's about tired of being forced to vote for the lesser of two evils. Well, we need to change that. Let's open it up so we have top 5 or whatever it may be. And so that goes there as well. We provide the why and we don't get into the how, because if we start spending time on the how, we're not talking about those shared values and those shared concerns.
Let's go to the next slide. I want to ask you, how much is it important that the numbers are big versus very kind of specific examples?
In terms of like the 148,000.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the bigger the number, the better. You can also use percentages if those, you know, make a better case for change. It really sort of just depends from place to place.
Okay. Let's go to this slide.
And so this gets to sort of the values proposition. Again, it's sort of like we need to identify those shared values that we all have and use those to sort of drive the policy reform that we're trying to achieve. When you look across all of sort of the election reform issues, you can generally expect the values that you see on the left-hand side here to pop from reform to reform to reform. I mean, even when you're talking about automatic voter registration or online registration for vote by mail, you can generally expect some of these to appear in messaging as a reason to support our proposal. A lot of what we've tested recently is more focused on open primaries and then ranked choice voting, but you do see synergy across all these reforms. And so at the top of the list, you have voice, giving voters more voice, the right to have their voice heard. It's a very basic line. It's a very basic concept that most Americans agree with. Freedom. This amendment gives you the freedom to vote. Again, a very core principle of American democracy. Competition. People want to have, you know, they expect to have competition, you know, and choices when they're at a grocery store or whatever. And you know, they want to see people compete for their vote. They don't want to see people just sort of like slide in because of, you know, the way our primary system's set up right now. They don't necessarily know that that's why they have an absence of competition, but they want to see more of it. Power and accountability, what I was talking to earlier. This amendment gives more power to voters and holds the bad guys, the politicians, accountable. So again, you know, taking power from one place and putting it in another. And then choice. We should have the freedom to pick between more and better candidates. Again, sort of that grocery store analogy. You know, you see multiple different products on the cereal aisle. We should have multiple different products when we're looking at a ballot. It gives us more choice and it gives us better options that fit our personal values. So yeah, that's this particular slide.
Sorry, let's go to this bit. And then I want to actually, let me do one question on this slide.
Mhm.
What I would suggest to people is pull out the value that authentically resonates with you and why you're doing this work. Because it's the thing that you can most explain. But is there, what would you say, Ben?
I mean, yeah, I mean, identify the thing that works best for you in terms of, your motivation. And again, I mean, I agree with Todd. I mean, the reason why I love doing this work is because I believe that our democracy has got some serious problems. And I think that without reforms like these, we will be in a lot of trouble, particularly given the closed party primary system. But if I say that, people are going to their eyes are going to gloss over and they're not going to stop paying attention to me. So what I need to do instead is I need to identify the thing that works best for me, voice, for instance, and say, I'm tired of not being heard. I want to make sure that my voice is heard when people go to whatever the state capital is that you're in, or to Washington, D.C. Identify that shared value and then hit on it as frequently as you possibly can, to Todd's point from earlier in the slide deck.
Okay. Let's talk about key values. Some of this is excuse me, veterans for all voters specific. Veterans who fought in uniform should be able to vote in elections. Simple, compelling, specific to our work. And then ranked choice voting and this notion of lesser of two evils. Ben, talk about the nuance of open primaries versus RCV.
Yeah, so depending on the state, RCV, I mean, in today's world, open primaries are going to test better than RCV because of the way that the Republican Party has been messaging RCV post 2020. And it's going to vary in terms of the amount of support for RCV from state to state. So in our view, it's always better to start with open primaries, which is a good place to start your conversation anyways, because you get to talk about having, especially if it's a top 4 system, having more choices. And if it's just top 2, even still, you can say, making sure that everyone has their voice heard in our democracy, no matter what election we're talking about, right? So you can start there, and then it's an easy pivot into talking about the general election reform that we're looking at. And it's not that we don't want to talk about ranked choice voting. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that it's on the ballot. But we can talk about it in the most advantageous way possible, which is to say, you're going to get a majority vote every time, and you're going to have more choices when you look at that ballot, and it's going to give you that, and as a result, it gives you the ability to have your voice heard and your priorities represented when you vote, something along those lines. So again, just sort of like a very, very 40,000-foot level description of what we're doing, leaning into things we know that people like the majority winner, and then pivoting to values.
Okay, just a couple more slides, then I want to try to get to questions that you guys have. This is a kind of a script that we are giving you as homework to kind of like take this slide and operationalize it for yourself. So you might just start with why you're doing this work, kind of go through, ask these questions, insert some data based on this slide deck, and kind of script out for yourself the 2-paragraph or 3-paragraph or the 1-sentence kind of thing that you would want to say, which might require doing a little homework. South Dakota independent voters, how many is that? Let me get that number so that becomes part of my script. But we wanted to give this to you as a guide. So what you think is wrong? How big is that? How big is that wrong? Hey, it's not just me that's frustrated. It turns out, 89% of people are also frustrated. And lowering expectations, which is like, this isn't a big flashpoint. This actually feels like a very simple and American thing that we should make politicians compete for votes. And if you don't have competitive elections, then like, is it really even an election? What is it if they're not actually fighting for their own reelection? What is it? We think talking about things that are unique to your state or personal anecdote are helpful. And then this is kind of the reason that you personally got involved with Veterans for All Voters. So we give that to you as homework messaging guide. We can revisit that, but that's sort of there. And then Avoid. I mean, there's some things that we would say avoid. We already talked about this, but avoid talking about technical solutions. Talk instead about the principles, which create more buy-in. Don't talk about specific politicians or scenarios. Like, I think it's tempting to kind of war game the impacts of this in an election cycle, but it's actually not helpful. It's better to kind of talk about this in the principal terms of it ensures that the people that win have the broadest appeal, irrespective of Republican or Democrat. This is a trap, and we all face it, but everyone wants to talk about Trump versus Biden. And like what we're doing actually has nothing to do with that, as we know. And really getting away from, forget the politicians. What do we deserve? What we deserve are more than, several choices that we are actually excited about, which feels crazy, but we should actually expect that as voters. So moving away from candidates in the presidential race. And then we always want to avoid talking negative about other reforms or movements. There's other efforts around other voting reforms and things like that. We acknowledge it. We know what we like and why we like it, but we remain open to new ideas. So I like to go back on people that say, "Well, I think ranked choice voting is too complicated," and then say, like, "Well, what do you think is the answer to the current system, or do you think the current system's working?" And like put it on them. Like, well, what do you think then? I know what I like and why, but so we kind of try to stay open in that posture. Last thing, and then I want to open to questions for Ben, is avoid acronyms. This is classic military. It's tempting. We all do it. But talk about us as veterans for all voters. That's part of the rebrand. I'm dogmatic and like swatting flies every time I see an acronym, because people beyond us have no idea what this stuff means. So it's always good to avoid acronyms. And then this is our vision and our mission. This is like literally word for word our mission statement and our vision statement, so that you guys have it, as well as the short version, which is there as well. I think I just hid the screen here. So we have this short boilerplate as well. So let me stop share, because that was the bulk of it, and open up the floor for questions for Ben in our remaining time. You jump in or raise your hand. Or what seems intuitive or hard or...
Hey, Todd, it's Mike Corman.
Yeah, Mike, please.
Hey, how are you? So two thoughts. Obviously, here in Illinois, you've asked me to step up and help out with, it's kind of a different organization that's closely affiliated with our organization. How would you, and I assume that's happening in other places as well. How do you see, sometimes I'll get asked a question by that sister organization, and then they'll say, well, let me know what Todd says. And obviously we can't scale what Todd says to 50 states and 6 territories or whatever it is. So how comfortable should we be in kind of guiding those conversations, answering those questions, and keeping that conversation flowing?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Our whole operating model, to your point, is that our vision is we organize Veterans for All Voters chapters across the United States in all 50 states. And then we support state-based reform efforts that are underway. Not that we would lead those efforts or initiate those efforts. That might happen by exception, but that, we would support Alaskans for Better Elections, or, Fair Vote Illinois, or whatever. So our whole operating model is to play an assist role to those state-based organizations. And I mean, honestly, from our perspective, this is why our organizational values and the onboarding that Eric leads is really important, because it's like, as long as you're kind of on the same page with us, you have full authority to push forward. We don't want to be a stopgap. And that's why we spend a lot of time talking about messaging, organizational values, try to build this culture in this community, so that, we don't create unforced errors by someone pops off on social media saying something that's very inconsistent with what we're trying to develop as a brand. That's problematic. But short of that, no, I mean, jump in and permission granted. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's helpful. The second thing, I just more comment than anything, based on the presentation we saw earlier. I totally understand the idea of wanting to kind of keep away from, like, the parties have access to, different tools and whatnot, but not every state, again, take Illinois, for example. We have more governmental entities here than any other state in the country by a long margin. I think it would be unfortunate to close off in a state like Illinois, where the party system is so entrenched today. I know where we're trying to go, but to close off anybody that happens to have to be affiliated with one party or the other, and as you know, I'm a moderate, I could really go either way, except in the current climate. So I just would be my point of view is I don't want to turn people away because they are maybe forced to be in a party like in Illinois, for lack of a better term. Because if you want to be an election judge in Illinois, you have to declare a party, as an example.
I think I totally, Mike, I get that. And then Todd, I'm going to go to you. I think it's nuanced, and this is where it's important that we have this conversation. I think what we want to anchor on are like key values. So I can be a Democrat or a Republican and still think it's wrong that 148,000 registered independents in the state of Wyoming cannot vote in a partisan primary. I think it's wrong. And I don't have to be a registered independent to think that. I can actually still be a Republican or Democrat. So I think you're right. We don't want to, we want to frame what we're doing as a matter of integrity for principles that matter. It's not that we are an independent movement. We are not. We are not here on behalf of the Ford Party. We are not here to take down Trump, to take down Biden. Like, we are not here to, we're not even here to like destroy the duopoly or end the two-party system. Like, we are not. What we are here for are an insistence that every registered voter should be able to vote in taxpayer-funded elections, and that there should be real competition. That's how you hold politicians accountable. And if it's only two choices, then that's not enough. You know, we wouldn't suffer that in going to Whole Foods or a grocery store. Why do we suffer it at the ballot box? So that's our strongest point, is to sort of stay, I think, anchored in those higher values. But it's a great question. This is why we have to have this conversation a lot. Todd, let's hit you first.
Great job. Thanks. I mean, this is awesome work. Appreciate you guys pulling this together. It's hard to do. You know, one of the things that we're finding, I mean, we're totally aligned on, you know, focusing on the why and the values and fairness and all of that. But we're also just, I think, getting increasingly concerned with some of the headwinds on RCV, and just trying to figure out how to do just a little bit of how, right? Just enough to demystify the how for people. So it's not this big boogeyman that I think the forces against the Open Primaries Initiative in Idaho are just hammering again and again.
Yeah.
So anyways, just curious in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we should do, I'm with you on that. We should do a little bit more on the how. I mean, part of what the polling says is, if it's final five voting, you talk about open primaries more than you talk about ranked choice voting, because that's much easier to understand, right? So it's like, you actually,
yeah.
And some folks find that sort of controversial, because it's like, well, why aren't we talking about the reforms that matter? I mean, the talking point can be, we have people that don't win the majority. And the reason they don't win the majority is because you don't have ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting ensures that the majority, you have to get a majority of votes to win. And that's kind of the short how that I've seen promulgated, but it's something that we can and should revisit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, Todd. And you know, what we've done is, you know, we're a final four, but our demo is actually just 3 candidates. So there's just one round. It's really easy to explain. And you know, the conversation is, look, if there's 4 candidates on the ballot, you just do that twice. It's easy.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of data. I mean, and this is hard. You know, we all go to the data. It's like the data from Alaska overwhelmingly says voters find it simple. So we know it's not complicated, but it's a messaging challenge that we're up against. Guys, I'm dogmatic on time. I never want to start late, and I never want to keep us late. So I'm going to conclude us here. Ben, is it okay if folks reach out to you? Jacques, we've already shared your info. If you want Ben's slides from the American Democracy Summit, first of all, we've extrapolated and put into our deck most of what is valuable to him. But if you email me, I'm also happy to share those with you, with your permission, Ben. Yeah. Great. Really important conversation. Ben, thank you so much. Jacques, thank you for joining. Jared as well. Lots of substance in these calls, and we'll reconvene in a month, and hopefully we'll be talking to most of you before then as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Onward.
Bye all.